The story of American clocks is very, very interesting. And one of the pioneers of the whole clock industry in America was a chap called Chauncey Jerome, who set up the Jerome Clock Company. And the clock we're looking at right now was made around about 1843. And I can be as specific as that because of the design of the label and the case and a few details like that, and the maker's name that is stamped on the brass of the movement. The patent for that movement was taken out in 1839, and the clock factory in Bristol burnt down in 1845, which leaves us a 6-year window for clocks made in Bristol. And the labels were printed by various different printers from time to time in batches, and each printer added his own initials or address or name or some little detail that allows us to tell a succession of printers and therefore labels from each other. That clock is known as an OG clock because an OG is a basic S-shaped curve, concave and then convex over there. And that goes right around the clock. And these OG clocks were copied by literally hundreds of other factories. We have an example of such a copied OG or an OG clock made by a different factory. In this case, the Waterbury Clock Company, and this clock was made probably very close to 1891, because that dial is identical to another a clock dial in another clock, and so is the label identical to the label in the same clock I referred to. But that second clock was made in 1891 because the picture on the front, instead of being a little boy and girl, was in that case a picture of the newly completed railway at Pikes Peak, which was a geared railway instead of a smooth track. So, and it has Pikes Peak, Colorado, or the abbreviation for COL, written at the bottom of the picture, as though the painting were signed. And that railway was made, or its manufacture was completed in 1891, which of course dates that picture, that dial, and that label, and consequently that does the same for me. In this case, on the inside, we have a second label in the corner, that little round label there, that refers to Herbert Baker's label. He was the retailer who sold the clock in England. And I found him in local records as a witness to a wedding in 1899. So he was around in that decade. Another factory that made these OG clocks was Seth Thomas. But this one we're looking at is, in the first place, just 4 or 5 inches, say 4 inches taller than all the others, because it runs for a week instead of a day. And the one next to it here was also made by Seth Thomas, and it is a 30-hour clock instead of being a 7-day clock like the one next to it. And the wood in these clocks, the veneering is really fine, because they were made of sometimes mahogany or rosewood, and in this case it was one of many that was made of zebra wood, which is a pretty rare sort of African wood. And not only did these chaps make a whole bunch of OG clocks, which are all striking clocks, but oops, just let me get up. Chauncey Jerome also made, he started making cottage clocks, and this particular clock there has a label inside of it that says, that identifies it as a gem, G-E-M, gem cottage clock, and that's what's written there, gem cottage clock. So from that cottage clock with its very economically made brass movement and fairly basic case, others made similar clocks, and we can see examples there. Okay, there's an alarm clock. Right, that's an alarm clock. That's an alarm clock. That's an alarm clock. And we can see that they're alarm clocks because of the alarm setting device at the center of the dial. And here is an alarm clock. Now, the first one was made in America. The second one there was made by the Uhrenfabrik Teutonia in Germany, and carries a label inside that says made in Germany because of the McKinley Act of I think 1881, which required imported goods to show clearly the label, a label with the country of origin. This clock is also made in Germany by Junghans, but inside of it, the light is not good enough to see it, but close examination shows that there's a picture of an eagle with the American flag, and it also says et pluribus unum, which we use a or and in English almost interchangeably, and the Romans used e or x. They just dropped the x quite easily, and the x means out of or from. So from many, where we get plural, one. So united in a manufactory or a factory or a country or whatever. And the slogan appears on the seal of the United States. And Junghans actually copied the same design of the eagle with the flag and the logo E Pluribus Unum. Next to it, there is a quaint little French alarm clock. You can see the Breguet hands, and at 5 o'clock the setting hand for the alarm. This clock in the middle here, the next one here was made by the Hamburg American Clock Company, and it's also a cottage clock specifically made for export to America and pretty much the rest of the world. Beyond that, this is not a cottage clock, but a French drum case clock that strikes rather sweetly on a bell. And there we have a cottage clock made for the export market by Winterhalter and Hofmann. And even though it's meant to be a cottage clock, it's a very solid, heavy clock with solid brass plates and a clock that will run for centuries. And it is unusual in this, that the dial for the alarm is not centered as with the cottage clocks like that. It's below the arbor for the hands, and below it there's a third winding arbor, which is not a winding arbor but a place to insert a key to adjust the alarm without turning the clock around. So, and right, then we come to another field of American clocks where these gingerbread clocks were enormously popular all over the world and were sold through the Sears Roebuck catalogue. What we're looking at in this case is a gingerbread clock made by the Ansonia brass company, or later the Ansonia Clock Company. They were started by Anson Phelps, hence the name Ansonia. And Anson Phelps got to such a point of manufacture that the whole town was named after him, the town of Ansonia. And in 1929, the factory closed down, and all the machinery was sold to the Russian government, and it's probably making clocks there still. But so successful were these clocks that other companies made them too, and hundreds of companies made OG clocks, hundreds of companies made cottage clocks, and hundreds of companies set up great big steam presses and pushed panels of oak through steam so that it became soft, and then used an hydraulic press to stamp that pattern into the of the clock. And this practice went far and wide across the world, right up and into the Seiko to Tokyo in Japan, where the Seikosha Clock Company, with its nice little trademark resembling that of Seth Thomas, started making and successfully made and exported gingerbread clocks for the international market. This one is in London, and there's not much to choose between it and the Ansonia next to it. Buddha, of course, is not a clock. I just thought you might want to know why we have a little brass foot in the corner. Here's just a friend of my mother's. So, and I think maybe there's a 13th clock here, there. I don't know who made it, but it's got a French drum movement in, and is a rather nice little turn of the 20th century walnut boudoir clock with a bit of inlay. So, to make life easier, if I refer to these clocks again, I think that I'll just say that first Jerome OG clock is number 1. That's number 2. The 8-day clock by Seth Thomas is number 3. The 30-hour OG clock by Seth Thomas would be number 4. And then we go to the other side of the hallway, and we find that the second clock by Chauncey Jerome, the Gem Cottage clock, would be number 5. Then number 6 is the Jahresuhrenfabrik Teutonia, and then we have the rather delightfully painted clock by Junghans, which is 7. We come down to number 8, that is the Hamburg American Clock Company. Number 9 would be the Winterhalter and Hoffmann clock, also an alarm clock. And then the striking clock by Jerpy Brothers is number 10. Number 11 would be the Ansonia gingerbread clock. Number 12 would be the Sakosha gingerbread clock. Number 13, the small French drum alarm with the enameled dial. Let me see, it's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 is that small alarm clock, and round back to the beginning here, the boudoir clock would be number 14. Jeez, that about sums it up.